poor rancher married the obese stranger only for the ranch, but she shocked him like he'd never been shocked before. Dust Creek, Arizona Territory, late spring, 1887. The church bell rang hollow in the blistering Sunday. Dust danced across the empty road, reluctant to settle, just like the unrest in Jonas Calloway's chest. He stood at the altar with his hat in one hand and his dignity in the other, barely. Jonas was 28, lean and sunburnt from years beneath the Arizona sky. Until last year, he was a proud man with 100 acres passed down from his father and grandfather. Now, the fields were dust, the well dry, and Calloway Ranch sat days away from being auctioned, unless he did the unthinkable. The pews groaned under the weight of a few curious townsfolk. Whispered behind gloves and bonnets, eyes darting between Jonas and the woman approaching the altar. Clarabelle Greeley was not what Dust Creek called beautiful. Her frame was large and unashamed. Her dark dress stretched tight around her body. She walked slowly but with purpose, chin high, eyes straight ahead. She didn't smile, didn't blush. She looked like someone attending a negotiation, not a wedding. Jonas glanced toward the back of the church. Horace Greeley stood in the shadows, arms crossed, silver watch chain catching the light. The richest landowner in the county, ruthless. And today, generous. The offer had been simple and brutal. "You marry my daughter," Greeley had said over brandy, "and I'll deed you the land by the spring." Jonas had stared at him. "The spring that feeds every ranch for 20 miles? "The very same," Greeley nodded. "You want water, you make Clarabelle your wife." "Hey, I'll sign the papers before sundown." "Why me?" "Because you're desperate," Greeley chuckled. "And because I know you won't run when people talk." So here Jonas stood, in a borrowed tie and worn boots, watching Clarabelle approach like a verdict already passed. The preacher cleared his throat. "We are gathered here in the eyes of the Lord to unite this man, Jonas Calloway, and this woman, Clarabelle Greeley." The words blurred. Jonas's throat dried. He glanced at her again. Her eyes weren't warm or hopeful, just steady, cold, watchful. When prompted, she answered first. "Do," she said, firm and without ceremony. Jonas hesitated. Then, "I do." There were no rings. Greeley had handed him a brass mule ring that morning. "It'll do," he'd muttered. Jonas slid it onto Clarabelle's finger. It stopped halfway, too tight. She didn't flinch as she forced it the rest of the way. He kissed the bride. He kissed her cheek. Her skin was unexpectedly warm. She didn't look at him. She looked past him and smiled. Not a joyful smile, not a shy one, a knowing smile. It curled something tight in Jonas's gut. She wasn't crying, wasn't nervous, and her eyes, those unreadable eyes, held no love, no relief, something closer to triumph. The reception was dry biscuits and lemonade under a faded awning. A few hired hands shook Jonas's hand out of politeness. The women gave stiff nods. The children stared until hushed. Clarabelle said nothing. She stood beside Jonas like a statue, unmoved and silent. When the sun dipped low, she turned and said, "I'm ready." They walked to the wagon. She carried one carpet bag. Jonas offered to help. She shook her head once. As she climbed aboard, the wood groaned. The horse shifted in its harness. The ride to Calloway Ranch was silent. Jonas kept his eyes on the road. The land around them lay dry and bare. The windmills spun idly. His home, a crooked cabin, a broken fence, a yard of withered dreams, waited in silence. He had married for survival, sacrificed pride, comfort, his name, and now he was bringing home a stranger. As the last rays of sun lit her profile, she turned to him and said calmly, "Do not expect this to be what you think it is." Jonas gripped the reins tighter, and for the first time that day he felt something colder than regret. He had gambled everything. No idea what game he'd just agreed to play. Calloway Ranch, same night, several hours after the wedding, a moonlit, windless night, the land quiet as a held breath. He stood alone on the porch, the dry wind brushing against his shirt, the kind of wind that carried no relief, only dust and memory. The house was dark behind him. Clarabelle hadn't said a word since they arrived. He'd expected awkward silence, perhaps even tears, in the shared bedroom. He'd prepared himself for discomfort, hell, even rejection. But instead, Clarabelle had stepped down from the wagon, walked straight past the front door, and disappeared into the barn without a glance back. Jonas waited a full 10 minutes before he followed. He was crouched near the corner wall of the barn, dress hitched up slightly, arms deep in a half-dug trench. A dented lantern flickered beside her. Tools were scattered across the floor. Pipes, real iron ones, lay coiled like sleeping snakes beside a rusted bucket. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Clarabelle? She did not look up. The door, you're letting the bugs in. Jonas blinked, but obeyed. I thought you'd be. He scratched his head, getting settled. I am. He stepped closer, peering down at what she was doing. What's that? Your broken water line, she said curtly. The one behind the livestock pens. Hasn't worked in months. How do you know about? I asked the mule. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand. It brayed in the direction of the leak. Animals are smarter than people think. Jonas knelt beside her, frowning. You're fixing it? I'm repairing it, she said, voice cool. Implies it was built right to begin with. You know plumbing? I know survival. He watched her tighten a rusted coupling with a short wrench, her movements practiced, efficient. The silence between them thickened. A few moments, he asked quietly, Why didn't you just say something? Because I didn't marry you to talk. She turned her head, meeting his gaze for the first time since they left the chapel. There was no softness in her eyes, no plea, just clarity. I don't need you to understand me, Jonas. I need you to stay alive long enough to understand what I'm trying to do. Back inside, Jonas lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The window was open, letting in the scent of dry earth and horses. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled, distant and lonesome. He hadn't undressed, couldn't. Mind was too full. Clarabelle, no, he still couldn't call her that without choking a little, was not what he expected. He didn't know what he expected, exactly. Sadness, shyness, a grateful silence? Instead, he got calloused hands and a pipe wrench. Floorboards creaked. She entered, holding a rolled-up scroll and wearing the same dusty dress. Her face shone with sweat, cheeks red from labor. Without a word, she closed the door behind her, turned the key, and set the lantern on the small table. Jonas sat up. Is something wrong? No, she replied, walking over. Something's about to be right. She handed him the scroll. He unrolled it, eyes narrowing. It was a hand-drawn map, careful, precise lines etched in pencil, not a child's sketch, a schematic. The underground water system buried beneath this valley, she said simply, built 15 years ago by the railroad, abandoned when the line shifted east. He blinked. Why do you have this? Because it leads straight beneath the Greeley lands. She folded her arms. Because that spring your father worshipped? It's not the only water under this dirt. Jonas looked at her, his voice low. Why are you showing me this? Her answer was steady, almost cold. Because I do not need you to love me, Jonas. I need you to survive, and I know how to make that happen, if you are willing to listen. She stood there, fierce and unyielding, the firelight catching the sharp edges of her shadow. And Jonas realized something in that moment. This was not a woman broken by loneliness or driven by desperation. This was a storm in the shape of a bride. Third week, the Callaway Ranch looked different. The shutters no longer hung crooked on their hinges. The front steps had been replaced, not perfectly, but strong and steady. The chicken coop had a new latch, and the old rain barrel, abandoned for years, was now collecting runoff from a sloped tin roof Clarabelle had installed herself. Jonas watched her from the barn window one morning, arms crossed, lips pressed together in reluctant admiration. She moved with purpose, no wasted energy, no idle chatter. At dawn, she was already elbow-deep in the garden, tilling soil that had once been thought barren. At dusk, she stood ankle-deep in the creek behind the house, hauling buckets for the citrus saplings she planted in neat rows. Somehow, between it all, she made time to reinforce the roof, build a root cellar, and repair the stovepipe Jonas had meant to fix 2 winters ago. People started to notice. Old Man Porter mentioned it first at the general store. "She's got hands like a blacksmith," he muttered, eyeing Jonas. "Damn if she ain't bringing that place back to life." Mrs. Tilley, the seamstress, offered Clarabelle a bundle of spare fabric one afternoon without being asked. "Might stitch you a proper apron," she said with an awkward smile. "You're putting in more work than the preacher's horse." Of course, not everyone was kind. Whispers still floated through town like flies. "Poor Jonas, married a beast. Probably sleeps in the barn. Man's pride's gone, that's for sure." Jonas heard every word, but what stung wasn't the gossip. It was how little it matched the truth. Each night, when he walked through the door and smelled stew bubbling on the stove, or saw her oil-stained fingers scribbling over maps by candlelight, he didn't see weakness. He saw clarity, control, fire. After a long day of fence mending, he found her sitting on the porch with 2 tin mugs of coffee. "I added cinnamon," she said, handing him one. "You like it?" He blinked. "How'd you know that?" "You muttered it in your sleep last week." Said, "Damn shame there ain't no cinnamon left." He laughed despite himself. "I was dreamin' about apple pie." She smirked. Figures. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that was comfortable, not heavy. Eventually, she spoke again, quiet this time. "My mother died when I was 15. Fever took her fast." Jonas turned toward her. "Never mentioned her family before. Your father raise you?" She hesitated. "Someone did, not him." That was all she said, and he didn't press. She gave him that much, and for now, it was enough. The days passed. Trust grew in small, careful increments. One morning, Jonas was sweeping out the front room when he saw her on the porch, back turned to him, holding a folded envelope in her hands. He recognized the seal, a government crest, wax pressed with a federal mark. Her fingers trembled. He stepped closer, just as she ripped the letter in half. "Hey," he started. She spun around, startled. He froze. The envelope pieces fluttered to the floor, and for a moment their eyes locked. No words. But Jonas had seen enough. The name on the letter wasn't Clarabelle Greeley. It was Thea Morgan. Neither of them spoke as she slowly bent down, gathered the torn letter, and walked back inside. Jonas remained on the porch, the broom still in his hand, a pit growing in his stomach. What the hell was he really married to, and what else had she been building beneath the bones of this ranch? Jonas waited until the sun dipped below the ridge, casting long amber shadows across the porch. The house behind him was quiet, save for the soft creak of floorboards as Clarabelle, no, Thea, moved inside. He had rehearsed what to say a dozen times. Questions, accusations. But when the door opened and she stepped out, her face unreadable, none of those words came the way he thought they would. Instead, his voice was calm, worn. "Tell me who Thea Morgan is, or should I keep guessing?" She froze. The screen door clicked shut behind her. "I suppose you saw the letter." He nodded. "The seal caught my eye. The name held it." She sighed, stepping past him to lean on the railing. Lantern light flickered between them. "Figured you'd find out." He waited. Quiet. "My name is Thea Morgan," she said. "I was a civil engineer under the Territorial Survey Office in Tucson. 3 years ago, they sent me to Dust Creek to inspect watershed rights near the spring." "Greeley's land," Jonas said. She nodded. "Except it wasn't his. Not legally. It was federal, meant for public use. But Horace, he forged documents, bribed clerks, claimed it had been deeded to his family generations ago. And you found out? I did. I filed a report, sent it up the chain. Weeks later, my wagon overturned outside Bisbee, papers stolen. Driver shot. They called it bandits. It wasn't. Jonas stared. You're lucky to be alive. She let out a hollow laugh. Clarabelle Greeley wasn't. That stopped him. She was real? She was, Thea said, sickly, sheltered. Died of yellow fever a year before I got here. Greeley kept it quiet. He had plans to marry her off for more influence. And you just stepped in? He gave me a choice, she said bitterly. He knew who I was, what I'd uncovered. I could disappear, or become the daughter he never had. Keep quiet. Play the part, Jonas swallowed. And marrying me? That was my idea, she said, facing him now. Greeley wanted me gone, married off and out of sight. I needed access to this ranch. Land sits on one of the buried aquifers Greeley's been trying to tap without permits. So you used me. I teamed with you, she said sharply. You needed the spring. I needed a base to expose the man stealing from this whole territory. The marriage gave us both something. You think that justifies lying? No, she admitted. I never promised you love, Jonas. I promised survival. He paced, fists clenched. I thought I was making a hard choice, he muttered. But you were playing some game. No, she snapped. I was fighting a war, and wars aren't won with good manners. Silence stretched between them. Thea stepped closer. I didn't ask to become her, but once I did, I saw what Greeley really was. He doesn't just own land, he owns silence, the law, the bank, the whole town. She pulled a folded map from her pocket, stained, worn, handed it to him. Your father marked this. Digging here, looking for the spring line he always believed existed. He was close, but someone made sure he never finished. Jonas studied it, his father's handwriting, survey notes he'd dismissed as desperate guesses. All this time the old man had been right. Really think you can bring Greeley down? Thea looked him straight in the eye. I know I can, but not without help. Jonas shook his head, breath tight. You married me under a false name, lied every day. Yes, she said, because you didn't need a wife. She stepped even closer, her voice low and sharp as steel. You took home a ticking bomb, and I'm telling you now, your days of quiet are over. She didn't flinch. You didn't marry a woman, Jonas. You married a goddamn explosion. And as the lantern flickered between them in the gathering dusk, Jonas felt it. Not anger, not fear, but the shiver of something vast unfolding. He wasn't just fighting to save his land anymore. He was standing on the edge of a war. Jonas did not speak to Thea for 2 full days after the truth unraveled on their porch. About his chores silently, hands rough with anger, mind clouded with betrayal. But it wasn't just the lies that gnawed at him, it was the clarity of her purpose, the fire in her voice, the way she stood her ground not as a woman seeking pity, but as a soldier bearing scars. And damn it, he could not stop thinking about her. By the 3rd night, he found himself standing outside her workroom, holding a fresh bandage and a tin of salve. He knocked once. She opened the door, surprised. Arms bleeding again, he said, nodding toward the cut she'd gotten while prying up old floorboards. She blinked, then stepped aside. He sat her down, unwrapped the crude cloth, and began cleaning the wound. You could have told me, he murmured. I should have, she replied. Silence. Softly, he added, I'd have helped you anyway. Her eyes flicked up. Something unspoken passed between them. Thea introduced Jonas to an old acquaintance of hers, Cal Everett, a former journalist turned drunkard who had once exposed railroad corruption before being run out of Phoenix. Now he lived in a shack on the edge of Dust Creek, half mad but sharp as ever. Greeley tried to kill me once, Cal said, spitting tobacco onto a flat rock. Failed. Been waiting for someone with a spine to finish what I started. Together, the 3 formed a plan. would gather documents hidden in county ledgers. Cal would write the exposé, timed with a federal inspection. Jonas knew the terrain, the people, the paths smugglers used under Greeley's payroll. By day, they played their roles. By night, they plotted. And something else began to shift. He started looking for Thea in ways he hadn't before. In the curve of her focus when she read blueprints. In the quiet hum she made when chopping herbs. In the moments she forgot to guard herself. And Thea, she let him. The town noticed when Thea saved Caleb Jensen, a 7-year-old boy who'd been bitten by a rattler near the riverbed. His mother screamed through the streets, begging for help. Most folks froze. Thea did not. She sprinted from the market, shoved a knife into the fire, and made it to the boy in minutes. Cut clean, precise and fast, drained the venom with a suction kit she carried in her satchel. By nightfall, Caleb was breathing again. People whispered in a new tone. She knew what to do. She didn't hesitate. She ain't just a big woman, she's a brave one. Jonas watched it happen, the shift in the town's eyes. In his own. Then came the ambush. Thea had gone alone into the county records building. Said she'd be gone an hour. She was gone 3. Jonas found her behind the stables near the courthouse, bloodied and half-conscious, a gash above her temple and bruises blooming down her arms. "Bastards caught me copying ledger pages," she mumbled as he carried her to the wagon. "Didn't want to kill me, just wanted to warn me." He said nothing, jaw clenched, fury simmering behind his silence. At home, he laid her in bed, cleaned her wounds, and sat beside her until the candle burned low. She stirred. Stayed. "Damn right I did." Her voice cracked. "I lied to you, Jonas. I dragged you into this." "You woke me up," he whispered, his hand reaching for hers. She blinked. "I've been asleep since the day my father died, just surviving. This land rot under me. But you walked in here with a war in your chest and a map in your hands." He gently clasped her hand in both of his, fingers rough but careful. "For the first time in years, I'm fighting for something real." She stared at him through tears and swollen lids. He didn't kiss her, didn't say love. But that night, he held her hand until dawn like a man who finally understood the weight and wonder of what he had. The wind howled across the flatlands that night, dry and bitter, as if it knew something wicked was coming. He sat in the darkened kitchen, rifle across his lap, lantern unlit. Thea lay on the couch, bandages fresh, her breathing steady but shallow. Outside, a full moon glazed over Dust Creek, silvering the cracked fields and casting long shadows. Here, Cal's warning had come. Someone tipped off Greeley. Maybe the county clerk, maybe a deputy. Whoever it was, Greeley now knew. And when a man like him sensed retribution coming, he did not wait for courts or papers. He sent fire instead. Jonas spotted torches over the ridge just past midnight. 4 riders, then 6, all in black dusters, no badges, no mercy. He touched Thea's shoulder. "They're coming." She winced, trying to sit. "The tunnel? Ready," he said. Spent the past week rebuilding an old irrigation trench under the barn, using his father's blueprints, rigged with pressure valves and water redirected from the buried aquifer. Tonight, it would be a trap. Thea attempted to rise. "You stay down," Jonas ordered. "I'll lead them in." "I can shoot," she said hoarsely. "I know. But tonight I need you alive." He kissed her forehead, then slipped into darkness. The barn door stood open, just as planned. Tools strewn, hay scattered, footprints faked, like someone had fled in a rush. He crept behind the shed and waited. The riders advanced, torches ablaze. They dismounted without hesitation, stepping toward the barn with practiced menace. When 3 entered, Jonas triggered the first valve. The ground trembled. Water surged upward, soaking the floor, dousing torchlight, flooding underfoot. One man cursed as footing slipped. Another cried out, blinded by the spray. Jonas shot the lantern above, plunging the barn into blackout. Panic erupted. Side, rifles rang out. Jonas took cover behind the trough as bullets shredded wood and fence posts. Then, a desperate scream. The fifth rider, pinned beneath his fallen horse, coat aflame, clawed at dirt, screaming for help. Jonas froze. The stakes blurred. A trap? But the anguish was real. Sprinted out, dropped beside the man, tore off the burning coat despite singed palms, dragged him clear, pinned him to the ground, threw dirt over the flames, and rolled him until the smoldering died. The man gasped, half-conscious. The others watched. Gunfire ceased. In that moment, only the rush of water, retreating hooves, and the hiss of dying embers remained. By dawn, townsfolk had come, drawn by smoke. Sheriff Bell arrived to find Jonas sitting beside the wounded man, hands blistered and raw. Thea stood behind him, bruised but upright, rifle slung, unused. The sheriff looked over the soaked barn, the damaged ground, the tracks leading toward town. "Lord Almighty," he whispered, "what the hell happened here?" Jonas did not answer. His act spoke. Seated beside the burned man, attending to him. Enmity extinguished by mercy. Not the blood, not the smoke, but the mercy. Creek, once unsparing toward Thea Morgan or the man who married her for water, stood silent, astonished that Jonas Calloway had done what few men would. He saved his enemy. The courthouse in Dust Creek had not seen a crowd this large since the railroad hearings of '79. Men leaned against the pillars, women stood beneath parasols in the sun, and children sat on fence rails, their eyes wide with curiosity and something else, hope. Inside, the heat clung to every wall. Wooden benches were packed, and at the front of the room stood Thea Morgan, no longer hiding behind the name Clarabelle Greeley. Her face was bruised, one arm still in a sling, but she stood tall, shoulders square, voice steady. She laid out every piece of evidence: forged deeds, doctored water rights, bank slips signed by hands long since paid off. Behind her, Cal Everett sat with a thick file of his own, maps, photographs, testimonies collected in secret over months. And on the bench sat the circuit judge from Prescott, a man brought in by federal order after Cal's articles reached the territorial papers. Greeley did not speak. He sat between two federal marshals, jaw clenched, hat removed, no longer the lord of anything. When the judge's gavel fell and the charges were read, fraud, bribery, attempted murder, the room erupted. There were no cheers, no jeers, just stunned silence. For the first time in Dust Creek's memory, someone had held power to account, and won. Outside the courthouse, the sun was beginning to lower behind the chapel steeple when the judge called one final matter. Thea stood beside Jonas, fingers laced tightly in his. Her voice wavered this time, but her gaze didn't. "I never meant to deceive the people of this town," she said. "I became Clarabelle to survive, yes, but once I met you all, once I saw what Greeley had done to this land, I stayed to fight, not for revenge, for truth." The judge nodded, solemn. "The law does not ignore false identity," he said, "even with good intentions. The federal office is reviewing the charges. There is discussion of deportation from the territory, pending further investigation." The murmur rippled across the crowd. Jonas took a step forward. "No," he said it calmly, but every head turned. "He goes," he continued, louder now. "I go." He looked at the judge, then turned to face the crowd, his neighbors, his friends, the very people who once whispered about his desperation. "I married her because I was losing my land. I stayed because I saw the kind of woman she is." He looked back at Thea, his voice catching. "I thought I needed water. Truth is, I needed her." He turned again, voice rising, raw and unfiltered. "You all saw her save a boy's life. Saw her take down a man who's bled this valley dry. You saw her risk everything while most of us stayed quiet. Then, softer, just above a whisper, I married her for dirt. But now, if I lose her, I don't know who I am anymore." Thea's hand trembled in his. He gripped it tighter. A long pause followed. Then the judge stood. "I will relay your statement, Mr. Holloway, to the Territorial Board, and I will personally request a full pardon under the Whistleblower Act." He banged the gavel once more. "In approval, Thea Morgan will remain a free citizen of this territory." Relief swept the crowd like a breeze through dry wheat. Thea turned to Jonas, eyes glossy, the edges of a smile forming. "You didn't have to say all that," he smiled back. "You blew up my life, Thea." She raised an eyebrow. "Regret it? Only that I didn't light the fuse myself. Spring came late that year, but when it did, the land responded like it had been waiting for a second chance." The official pardon arrived by post, sealed by the territorial governor. Morgan was absolved of all charges, her actions deemed in service of justice. The document hung in the corner of their modest home. Jonas read it once, then never again. He didn't need paper to know what she'd earned. They never returned to calling each other husband and wife. Vows, no ceremony, no declarations beneath the stars. But the town knew what they saw. They saw a woman who turned a failing ranch into something alive. They saw a man once broken by drought now teaching boys how to read soil, not guess at it. Together, Jonas and Thea transformed the North Pasture into a schoolyard, not for letters and math, but for irrigation, mechanics, and harvest. Thea taught girls to weld, to graft citrus, to speak boldly. Jonas taught boys how to mend fences, and themselves. Came from neighboring towns, not just to learn from the school, but from the way Jonas and Thea moved beside one another. Quiet, equal, strong. One afternoon, Sheriff Bell arrived with news. Clarabelle Greeley, the real one, had been confirmed dead, buried in a churchyard near Tombstone. A midwife who once nursed her through fever identified the body. "Never stood a chance," Bell said softly, "but her name did." With leftover stone from the barn fire, Jonas and Thea carved a marker. It stood beneath a lone cottonwood beside the garden. Clarabelle Greeley, daughter. Forgotten, now remembered. Her name brought justice. May her rest be peaceful. No one in town objected. By midsummer, the garden behind the house, once dry and thorn-ridden, began to bloom. Not just from water, but something deeper. Each morning, Jonas and Thea rose before the Sunday. They tended the soil, not with urgency, but with care, sometimes side by side. Sometimes in silence, but always near. One morning, as Thea knelt to replant a stubborn row of marigolds, Jonas sat beside her, brushing dirt from her hands. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She looked up beneath the brim of her straw hat. "Next is tomorrow," she said. "As far as I've ever let myself go." He nodded. "Fair enough." A pause. Then he added, "I used to think love came like lightning, big, loud, all at once. And now, he glanced back at the rows they'd built. "Now I think it's like digging a well. Quiet, slow. Sometimes you hit stone, but when you find water, it's real." She didn't answer. She just reached for his hand. They stood there together, boots muddy, sun warming their backs, fingers entwined. People had laughed when Jonas Calloway married a stranger for land, but no one laughed now. In Dust Creek, where water was once more precious than gold, something even rarer had taken root. "They laughed when I married her for dirt," Jonas would one day say. Guessed, buried in all that dust, was the seed of something bigger than love. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you felt the dust, the danger, and the quiet kind of love that grows where no one expects it, then this is just the beginning. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales of passion, loyalty, and redemption from the raw edges of American history, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. Hit that like button, and subscribe to join us on the next ride through love, loss, and the wild unknown. The bell, so you never miss a story that might stay with you longer than you expected. We'll see you on the next trail. Until then, ride true and love brave.